day, viewers. Welcome back to the Preaching Humanist with David Oliverio. That is I. Special day today at the atheist community of Austin in frigid, cold Austin, Texas. We got a rare cold front that came through. I've got my special guest with me today, Jen Stemmer from Oklahoma. Jen?
Hi.
Nice to have you. So excited. And we're going to have a really good talk today. Jen and I met, oh gosh, when did we meet? About a month ago?
Yeah, it wasn't too long ago.
Yeah. And you had come down from Oklahoma to visit the ACA. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. I had been watching the shows for about 6 months, and I saw the opportunity to come down and see the shows, so I took it.
Beautiful. So I think my buddies and I had just finished the show, and we'd walked out, and I saw you and I guess a couple of your friends sitting out there, and my big mouth, we went over and introduced ourselves. And then immediately, I could kind of tell you came from the same background I did.
Yep.
And so Jen and I are going to have a good talk today. She comes from the same background I did, Pentecostal Christianity. And I want to interview Jen today, and I just think this is so important for viewers to see this, because there are a lot of people out there, as you know, Jen, that are kind of on the fence, right? They, especially your age, as a millennial.
Oh, yeah.
And they have these doubts and these fears, and they were raised a certain way. But I just love to sit and listen to atheists give their deconversion story. That just, actually, as an old guy, I get kind of all teary-eyed when I hear people give their stories and how they came out and how they're making the world better. So Jen is a student at Rogers State University. Let's say you're the founder and president of Secular Student Alliance.
Yes.
Correct? And you brought two of your friends, vice president of the Secular Student Alliance, Bryce, and Secretary Bree. So we're going to have Bryce and Bree coming in. Not yet, folks, but we're going to have them come in here in a little bit and have a good talk about the future of secularism and atheism in our country, especially of your generation. So Jen, I'm really excited to hear about what happened in your life. So I want you to start back when you were born. Of course, you can't go back that far.
That's quite a long ways.
Yeah.
So basically the second day of my life, I was in church, and I hardly missed a service since then. My parents were really involved in the church. My dad is on the board member. It was one of the board members, and then my mom was a greeter. So as people would come in, she would shake their hands and welcome them. And they also, both would teach children's church every now and then. So they were very active. And so that meant I became very active. And so as I grew up, I started being in the worship team. You know, I slowly became the lead singer for the worship group. And I was pretty involved. I taught a Sunday school class for quite a while. But there was always, kind of something that never really added up. There are quite a few things where, I would be reading my Bible and it wouldn't make sense, or even if it made sense, it wasn't necessarily something I agreed with. And, questioning it wasn't really an option. If I did something wrong, it would always be writing verses from the Bible in order to, that was my punishment, was writing verses over and over.
Wow.
If I was disrespecting my parents, thou shalt
excuse me, your parents made you do that, or
Yes.
the church leaders?
My parents, yeah.
Wow.
That was their way of disciplining. And even through all of that, it was just so, it seemed more corrupt than what I really wanted it to be. And so that led me to ask a lot of questions, but that wasn't really allowed. And they would catch me trying to Google my questions. And
At what age would you say this was?
Well, I didn't really start getting really skeptical until about 13. I kind of started reaching out more into the world and seeing that it wasn't all just in the closed doors that I'd seen in my church. But I was always told, not to ask the internet, not to ask people at school, but to go and ask my pastor. And so I was really only getting one side of things.
Right.
And so whenever I was able to go off to college, I didn't go very far away. It was only about 2 hours away from home. But it was kind of able to see a whole new side of the world that I didn't even know existed, and a more secular side of the world. And my brother was an atheist, and it was a pretty negative time whenever he came out as an atheist.
With your parents?
Yeah, not just because of him being an atheist, but because of the way that he was living his life. And so that had a really negative view for me of what atheism was. And I didn't really get a more positive view until I went to college, and I saw that, you know, it's not all as bad as it may seem.
Isn't that interesting, though? So your upbringing in Pentecostal fundamentalist Christianity, you were told to not question, not doubt, or not test the Lord thy God.
Exactly.
You know, or to look outside that little subjective Christian bubble, right? But it's interesting, Jen, that you said that you started having these doubts or questions and already at a very young age. That is very interesting.
Yeah, but I still had to, I wasn't really able to talk about them. They were definitely very low-key. You know, I was still singing in the worship team. I was teaching a Sunday school class. I was teaching 3-year-olds, you know, about Jesus. And so if you're teaching people about Jesus, you certainly can't be questioning him. So it took me a while to even feel confident in asking questions. But it wasn't just the skepticism that turned me towards atheism. You know, throughout my upbringing, I always felt like I wasn't good enough because that's, you know, I feel like that's what you're taught whenever you're growing up, is that you're not good enough and you need to ask God for forgiveness, even if you haven't done anything wrong. And so I just always had this overbearing feeling of not being enough. And that caused, you know, a lot of mental issues. And as I grew up, you know, they only got worse. I would have nightmares of hell. Even though I thought I was being a good person, I was doing everything that I could, but it didn't feel like it was enough. And so that harm that it was doing to me, I really wanted to escape that. I didn't want to feel that pressure to be this perfect being that seemed to be impossible.
Beautiful. Is that what, I guess, for me at least, that very danger of what religion and Christianity can do for young people, to the mind, for guilt and shame, that I went through the same thing you did many years ago. Does that give you, Jen, a personal passion and drive for your activism to reach out and try to help other people?
Oh, certainly. The type of pain that coming out of that caused, you know, I was in a really deep depression for a long time, and at one point I tried to commit suicide, and that was kind of my breaking point. You know, surviving that trial was the turning point that, like, something has to change. And so it was really all within that same week that I kind of ditched my beliefs, and I started searching for a secular community. And I was able to find a friend on campus, Laura. She kind of adopted me in and kind of told me that, you know, just because I've been told all of these things doesn't mean that it's true, and opened my eyes to active atheism. And she helped me kind of realize that there's a whole community to be built between atheists, because whenever at least for me, whenever I became an atheist, I felt so alone. You know, after being raised in Oklahoma especially, but in such a small town, it felt like everybody was a Christian. And so whenever I became an atheist, you know, I felt like I was the only atheist, not just in Oklahoma, but in the world, even though that's not true. And so whenever I was looking for that community, it was kind of missing. So that's why I started doing some more research, and I actually was watching the Atheist Community of Austin shows, and they had been talking about Secular Student Alliance, and I think it was only like a slight mention, you know, not even in depth, but it really piqued my interest. So I started researching, and I got in contact with their national headquarters. And so I was able to start up the Secular Student Alliance on RSU's campus.
Beautiful, beautiful. So let's go back to your change, your metamorphosis, your deconversion story, because this is very fascinating to me. Those of us that came out of a very strong Pentecostal evangelical background like you and I did, Jim, it's interesting to hear you say that you were really unaware of what the outside world consisted of. Did you think that before you started doubting, before you started thinking for yourself a few years ago, did you think that that outside world, the what we used to call the world, right? Be not in the world, neither be a part of it.
You don't want to be part of the world.
Right. Did you think that people in the world were these very immoral, evil, nihilistic people, and they had no hope or happiness?
Oh, certainly. Before I went off to college, I had to have a little meeting with the elders of the church. And one thing that they warned me about, I'd never gone out of my small town. And so they sat me down and tried to tell me about the real world. And they talked about how concerned they were because they just knew that once I left, that I wouldn't be coming back. And of course, at the time, I really brushed away these fears because I was like, no, I'm a devout Christian. I love God, and there's nothing that could change that. But it really was a matter of, months out of just constant being told what to believe that I was able to explore myself and really able to see that the world isn't as evil as they made it out to be. I always viewed everyone who wasn't a Christian as some sort of, not necessarily an immoral thug, but I really questioned where they got their morality.
Absolutely.
Because, the good book told me what to do. And so if they didn't have that, what did they have? And so I was really wondering, how could you be a moral person without having the grace of God? And after losing that grace of God, I kind of realized that I feel more moral and feel like a better person now than I ever was with
big
God.
Smile on my face. I mean, isn't that what it's about? And that's why we should be out telling people this.
Exactly, because this place, as a Christian, I kind of viewed the world as a stepping stone to something better. I didn't really care about the people around me. I didn't care about the planet. I would litter. I was that bad. I would litter. And so I didn't care about the place that I lived because it was temporary. I was going to spend an eternity in paradise. But now, I don't have that. Whenever I'm gone, I'm gone. And so I'm trying to take this time that I do have and really embellish it for all it's worth. I try to do the most good.
Beautiful. So would you say that you value your life more now since you let go of supernatural beliefs?
Oh, certainly. There were times whenever I was my most devout that, I've always really battled with depression, but there were times where I would think I could just die and then I would go to heaven. I can't wait to die so I can just be with Jesus. And, from a Christian point of view, like I would tell my mom that, and that's an exciting thing. If your child told you, I can't wait to be with Jesus, that's awesome. But now looking back, that was an awful place to be. The life that I have now is so much more valuable than the life that I was living.
I love that book that I think it was Chris Johnson. I'm not sure. We have it here in the library somewhere, but A Better Life. And I think it's so important for us to inform people that are still in these religions that we do have a better life. Most of us do.
Yeah, I was always told that there was a God-shaped hole in people's hearts and that they would try to fill it with drugs or with illegal activities or all of these different things, and it just never worked because the only thing that could fill that hole was God. And now I feel like what people really want is love and acceptance, and not just for themselves, but to be able to give that to others and to be able to walk around and just exuding that love and acceptance. I feel like once I kind of got into that harmony with myself and was able to love and accept myself, that as I walked around, that would kind of exude from me. And that sounds very spiritual because, I remember being a Christian, they would say, people should know that you're a Christian as soon as you walk in the room. And now I just feel like people know I'm a good person whenever I walk in the room.
Do you get mistaken for a Christian at times?
Oh, yeah.
And, and tell us why.
Oh, well, my parents don't know that I am an atheist, and so many times I will kind of put on my Christian mask and I will go out, and it's it's a process. It's certainly a process whenever I have to kind of like hide that side of me.
Yeah. But wouldn't you say that, I mean, I've had this many times, people just think if you're doing something good for someone else, or you seem happy, you're out in public, you're whistling or something, I mean, and you talk to people, most people, my experience through the years of activism is they will assume that you love Jesus and you're a
Don't you
Christian.
know that all good people are Christians?
That's exactly where I'm headed.
Yeah, you cannot, it's nearly impossible for people to approach you and think that you're a good person and also not just assume that you're a Christian.
Do you get that quite often when you're out with your team and doing your activism at your university?
So we haven't had, we just established Secular Student Alliance this past semester.
Okay.
So it's very new, but I'm also pretty active in the atheist community of Tulsa. Oh. And we went to feed the homeless a couple of months back. And it was absolutely incredible because these people would come through the line and they would tell us, God bless, and that, oh, like, thank God that you are here and you have really blessed us. And then we would have people asking us who we were with. And whenever we told them we were with the atheist community of Tulsa, they were mind blown. They were like, you're doing good for people, just for people?
For goodness sake. What a concept.
Right?
Yeah, the human mind could never figure that out. It had to be from some God.
It had to be.
It just, But that's part of our, rather than just being atheist only, I think most of us are growing into our secular humanism, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's what drives us to make the world better with love and kindness and so forth.
I used to have a very negative view of mankind. I didn't think that we were good. The Bible would teach us that we were all born in sin. And so I thought that the world was sinful. And it really isn't. It's really a great place. You go out and there are so many people doing so many good things just for other people, just people helping people. And whereas in Christianity or other religions, you may give that good credit to God, but these people don't. This goodness is coming from them. It's coming from their love of humankind. And I think that's even more special than just saying that a God laid it on their heart for them to be good.
When you eventually or finally let go of this whole concept of God, Jen, did you go through a time, I know it's been fairly recently, did you go through a time of holding on to some of that residual fear of immortality or hell? Did you have any of that lingering?
To this day, I still struggle with the concept of death. Whenever you grow up thinking that whenever you die, it's not over, you have an eternity, it's difficult to really grasp the concept of death, and it's kind of like having to mourn everyone that you've lost all over again because, they've passed away for a while now, but you thought you were going to see them again, but now you know that that's not going to happen. And so there are many times, whenever I will just start thinking about all of the people that I've lost, and I'll just break down because I know that I'm not going to see them again. And that's one of the ways that I think being religious at one point and coming out of that has continued to harm me even after I've let it go, is because I still have to remember all of those people that I lost, knowing that at one point I thought I was going to see them again. And that just makes it much harder to really go through the grieving process.
We just have a few more minutes. I want to bring your friends in here in a moment. We could talk about this beautiful movement of these millennials and all the great work they're doing, secularism and humanism and atheism and all. Would you say that your relationship with your parents are still good? Have you told them? Have you not? Where are you at on this?
They do not know that I'm an atheist. My parents are probably some of the best people in the world. They are those kind of Christians that take the good parts of the Bible and really, really major on them. Like, they try to love everybody. And my parents, growing up, my dad, every night before I went to bed, he would have me say, how much do I love you? And my response would always be that he loves me so much that there's nothing I could do that would make him stop loving me. Wow. And so they don't know I'm an atheist, but that's not because I am afraid of how they will react to me. I know that my parents are still going to love me, but it's more for their sake. my mom is such a devout Christian that I would hate for her to think that I'm going to hell. Like that, I remember being a Christian and thinking that some of my friends were going to hell, and that was the most heartbreaking feeling. And so I would never want my mom to feel that way, or my dad. And so I haven't told them. I think as I grow, as I mature, as I go off on my own, I probably will. But I just don't think at this moment they would be able to emotionally handle
I think it's
that.
different for everybody, Jen. I mean, some people can come out immediately to their family, but you have to use rational morality and so forth and think these things through, right? Because we don't pray about stuff anymore. We think, right?
No. Oh, man. The amount of times my mom has texted me and, you know, I'll tell her that I've passed a test, or, you know, I made straight A's, and she'll just go, well, that's because I was praying for you.
Of course.
It's like, thank you. It's not because of the hours and hours I spent working.
And studying
it's because you prayed for me.
And
thank
drinking
you.
coffee all night long and staying up, or whatever it would take. Yeah. Well, sounds like you have some really good parents. And when I'm out with doing our activism, dealing with going out on the street and talking to people, or debates, whatever I do with my buddies, we get that so often from people that would ask, you know, if what would happen if your parents found out if you were atheist and so forth. I tell my story, but you're very fortunate to have some wonderful people as parents. Now, we don't hear that story all the time. There are, as you know, there are a lot of atheists that have come out and been completely disowned by their family. And sometimes it goes the other way. I've never met anybody who's an atheist who disowned a Christian. I've yet to see that. I've heard people say it, and it's usually a Christian. Pretty hard for me to believe, but I'll believe anything to be true. But you got to prove it.
Exactly. You have to have proof that meets the claims.
Absolutely. So right before we end up, did you do any of the tongue-talking, Jen? Did you get to that point in your relationship with Jesus?
Oh, yeah.
Because remember, repent, be baptized, every one of you, in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Did they baptize you in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, or Father, Son, Holy Spirit?
I was Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, of course. And I was baptized 3 times in my life. Once whenever I was very young, and I was just beginning to really grasp the concept. And then once whenever I was a little bit older, and I feel like I had a better understanding and I was more like rooted in my Christianity.
Yeah.
And then one after I felt like I had strayed a little bit and came back.
Yeah.
And so then I was baptized again. As for the speaking in tongues, I was always told that if you're really saved, then you should be able to speak in tongues, because that's the evidence. And I would talk to my mom about it, and she would tell me how incredible of an experience it was. And so service after service, I would go up to the front, and the congregation would gather around me, and they would pray for me.
And lay hands on you.
They would lay hands on me, the oil.
Anoint the sick.
Yep. They would just try to help me get there. And I remember I was so tired of failing day after day after day. And so at one point, I didn't really care anymore about doing it for myself. I just didn't want everyone else to think that I wasn't really a Christian. And so I remember just spouting off, babbling nonsense, just trying to make it sound like everything else that I had heard. And everyone just started clapping and rejoicing and jumping up and down and speaking in tongues.
Yeah.
So it was quite a process.
It's interesting because our friends, and your friends, my friends, and so forth, who came out of Christianity, and their fellow atheists as well, who do not come from the background we came from, have such a hard understanding. It's so incomprehensible for them to figure out, you mean you actually spoke in tongues?
Oh, yeah. We would get, messages from God himself. You know, we would have someone stand up in service and speak in tongues, and then at the end of their speech, they would say, "Thus saith the Lord."
And it had to be "Thus saith," King James.
Oh, yes, it has to be. And then every now and then we would have another elder of the church stand up and give an interpretation, but other times you didn't get an interpretation, and you would just sit there in silence for about 5 minutes, just kind of letting it wash over you as if you were supposed to understand what they were saying.
Bringing back all these boy's memory. You know. I remember before I started preaching, I was playing piano in my dad's church before I went on staff and went out and did evangelism. But I would lead from the piano, right? And we did the "This is the day," all the different songs.
I was singing my friends some of the old songs.
We could sing some of the same songs.
Yep.
It's once you come to the knowledge that this stuff is just all a big line, and there's nothing up there but space, time, energy, matter. You can actually go back and talk about it because we're free from that stuff.
Yeah.
And it's so fun to talk about because it is ridiculous. It's so childish, but we can sing these songs and just have fun with it, and it's just like little fairy tales and fables,
Oh, yeah.
But I remember sitting at the piano probably when I was your age, even before I would preach or whatever, and we would the prophecy. So I would literally control the whole service by the piano.
Oh,
I would lead people the emotional waves, high and low, and I would start doing all the runs on the piano, louder, and then the drums would kick in, the bass guitar, the guitars, and everybody would start hooping and hollering, speaking in tongues.
That was one of the things that, it was probably a year of me being really skeptic before I actually became an atheist and kind of ditched all my beliefs. And one of the things that kept me holding on was that emotional response that I would get during worship services, because how could that be anything other than God? And, I'm trying to get an associate's in psychology. And through those classes, I was able to learn the manipulation of music to evoke those emotional responses. And I remember before we would, do worship services, I would show up early and we would go through the practice, and we would specifically pick songs that would just slowly build up in emotional intensity. And we had a stack of songs. Name
some songs. It's probably the same ones. Your generation, I bet they're oldie goldies that I used to do.
Well, the ones that I was singing for them was Ain't It Grand to Be a Christian? Do you ever do that one? That one was more an upbeat one.
Okay.
We did Because He Lives.
Yep.
Oh, man, that one was always a mover. Yep. Amazing Grace.
Oh, yeah.
Our God is an Awesome God.
Oh, that's still around.
Yep. Yeah. We would do all of them, but we would just have a stack of ones where if we felt that the opportunity to get emotional responses, we would just pull one of them out of the stack.
Yeah.
And, it doesn't matter what we had planned.
But that was God speaking to you, though.
Yeah, of course.
Sure,
it was God moving us to choose those
Holy
songs.
Spirit.
It wasn't us trying to manipulate the emotions. It was God.
Yeah. Oh, we could go for hours on this. I mean, it's so interesting because a lot of my atheist friends who came out of Christianity, it's either like Methodist or Baptist or Mormonism and stuff. But once in a while, I run into somebody like you who has the same background, and we can share this stuff.
Because, you never realize how strange it all is until you look back on it. I remember I was the girl in school where if someone wanted to date me, you had to come to my church. And, I normally wouldn't get a second date because we would do some pretty crazy things in that church. We would be running all around the building.
Jericho March.
Yes, we would
did the Jericho March?
Yes, sometimes if people were really feeling it, they would get up and they would start just walking around, praising God. And you would just fall in line one by one.
Yep. Casting out demons?
Oh, yeah.
We Slaying the spirit?
Oh, yeah. Oh, man. Yeah. We would always have people just laying everywhere with blankets covering them. And we were,
Well, the blankets are for the women in dresses, though.
Oh, that's not,
right?
we did it for both.
Oh,
we did it for both men and women.
Oh, you were a step ahead of us.
Yes, yeah.
They were more enlightened than we were.
I remember once at church camp, which that's a whole roller coaster on its own. But once at church camp, I was seeing all of these people being slain in the spirit and falling on the ground and just screaming for God. And I was like, oh, well, hey, that looks kind of fun. And so I decided to do it myself. And it's really not as fun as they make it out to seem. You're just laying on the cold ground.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, you know what? We're going to close up because I want to continue this talk. We're going to have your two friends come in here in a moment, and we'll talk about the Secular Student Alliance and this whole new movement in this in the millennials and all the exciting things that are happening. So thank you for coming on, Jen. You did great.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
And thank you for watching the Preaching Humanist with David Oliverio. Have a wonderful day.